It feels like the relationship and things have deteriorated and unravelled pretty quickly since the last time we spoke to you. What are the implications now, and how grave are they for businesses and individuals that have ties to both sides of the fight?
Well, there are many things that remain unclear. The most important one is that the law that the National People's Congress is considering to tighten security in Hong Kong has not yet been revealed. And we really need to look at the legislation, look at the words, what do the words mean, and what will happen. I think that we have a general idea, but the details matter. Also, Secretary Pompeo's announcement today that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous from China is in and of itself a big step. But the practical implications of that for trade or for visas or for investment or for monetary policy are not yet clear. So over the next few days, I would expect a lot of announcements on both sides. But I would agree with you, on both sides, things are getting a little bit more testy and even more tense. Thank you.
We are just getting some more details from the Chinese embassy in the US, their reaction saying that the security legislation that's due to be passed by the NPC is said to be, quote, very narrow, that China will be taking the necessary countermeasures when it comes to meddling. So clearly a reaction to what we heard from Mike Pompeo and just the war of words that has happened so far. We know that there's great concerns over the legitimacy now of financial institutions, of government institutions in Hong Kong. Are you hearing concerns from your membership, what this means for companies and people that are working in Hong Kong? Will they be subject to mainland law or to Hong Kong law, for example?
Well, I think that it's a wonderful question. The Chinese embassy is saying that this should worry only terrorists and criminals. Well, what we expect to happen is that Chinese law enforcement will enter Hong Kong and will operate in Hong Kong. There's a little bit of a disconnect, however, between Chinese legal standards and Hong Kong legal standards, and Chinese police and other law enforcement officials in the Hong Kong court system. So how this is going to work out is anyone's guess. Indeed, what does it mean for the sanctity of contracts? What does it mean for American companies that are invested in Hong Kong? What does it mean for headquarters of companies in Hong Kong currently but operating throughout all of Asia? I think is a question that we're going to need to look at in the future. We don't really know, although the signs this evening are quite worrying.
Any indication from some of your members that perhaps if the national security law in Beijing is implemented correctly, it in fact could safeguard the rule of law in Hong Kong, remove some of the uncertainties like the ongoing protests in Hong Kong, and make business easier?
Well, I have heard, particularly among some Americans in Hong Kong, who feel that very much that way, that the protests have been inconvenient and perhaps dangerous at times. However, I think right now, rather than relief, the general feeling is a sense of yet more uncertainty and yet more lack of clarity as to the future trends within the U.S.-China bilateral relationship, and also vis-a-vis American companies invested in Hong Kong.
So what actions would your members like to see the Trump administration take on Hong Kong, given that these threats coming from the U.S. are based on the fact that perhaps Beijing's reach is just becoming too strong within the city, and that could eventually affect the way that you can actually do business in Hong Kong?
Well, one of the dilemmas that the Trump administration faces is that any steps that it could take will probably hurt the people of Hong Kong and perhaps American companies in Hong Kong as much as anybody else. Anything on the visa side, on the tariff side, on the currency side will hurt Hong Kong. We don't want to hurt Hong Kong. I would expect more talk about the Greater Magnitsky Act and possible sanctioning of individual Chinese government officials, Communist Party leaders, particularly those who may be active in Hong Kong. That might be one way to proceed without further hurting a bad situation for the people of Hong Kong. I think a key principle to keep in mind is what's good for the people of Hong Kong at this time of great uncertainty and economic distress. This is a difficult time for Hong Kong, and we don't want to make it worse.
Ambassador, drawing on your past experience in diplomacy, is there a better playbook that should be used at the moment when it comes to the dealings that we're seeing between Washington and Beijing, but also between Beijing and some of its other trading partners like Australia?
Well, I would have to say that the lack of communications is a concern. There used to be dozens and dozens of discussions and negotiations and cooperation groups. And now, unfortunately, there's a grave lack of communication between Washington and Beijing that's only exacerbated by COVID-19. I think also that there is a lack of trust now that is at a more dangerous level than at any time in the past since the resumption of relations in 1976. So these are difficult times for U.S.-China bilateral relations. COVID makes it worse. The U.S. election process probably makes it more complicated. And Chinese aggressiveness in around the region, including Hong Kong, South China Sea, India, and elsewhere, yet make it all the more difficult. So indeed, these are tense times, and we would urge de-escalation on all sides.
Ambassador, we're just getting sort of some more details from this China embassy statement in the US, essentially talking about how narrow the category of acts that, said to be seriously jeopardizing national security that are targeted under this new law. And in terms of the foreign meddling, saying that they would take necessary countermeasures. So one of those countermeasures that a lot of US companies would be worried about is being placed on some sort of non-entity list, right? Is that something that your members are seriously thinking that could be a possibility, and what could be the response? What are the implications?
Well, yeah, the Chinese have been talking about an unreliable entities list for about the last year. And I think that they look at it a little bit differently than the Hong Kong type of situation. They look at it rather as a counterpart to the U.S. Entities list managed by the Department of Commerce for export control purposes. However, this type of sanction against foreign companies could be used under Chinese law in any way that they want. And so, indeed, it is a worry. Arbitrary retaliatory actions by any government are a concern for the corporate world, and we hope not to see that. In the specific Hong Kong context, the Chinese are making it clear that their intent is on the, if you will, the political side to stop terrorism and what they consider terrorism or treasonous or independence type of activities. However, I don't think that foreign companies or foreigners living in Taiwan are going to take that much solace in that narrow focus, knowing that could be interpreted very broadly, and that the future actions by Chinese police authorities in Hong Kong are certainly going to be more robust than they are now, or they ever have been in the future. And that's something that is will increase the level of uncertainty and anxiety as we go forth.